Greetings, it's Friday night, it's time to do a little bit of route opinion slash rant slash reaction video. Today's topic is Rock is Dead by Richard Kruspe, the guitar player for a big band called Rammstein. Now there was recently a news story about how rock and roll is dead, and as a form of rebellion and whatnot. That spawned some news, obviously, from various sources, both in Finland and outside. And also, as locally, I noticed quite a bit of talking in social media, at least, with the news platforms and whatnot, about the idea that rock and roll is dead. Now, is it? There are good points, even though the question is kind of old, and by all means people kind of could be thought to be over that. It's like beyond reasoning, but there's a certain point. But as always with these opinion videos, it's time to take some beverages. By no means this is sponsored by nobody except by myself, but I want to always share the beer stories with you. So today I'm having some Mikkel's Creamsicle Friends. This is a double dry hopped IPA with oranges and lactose. What an interesting combination. So let's see how this turns out to be this thirst quenching drink with my bubble. So rock and roll is dead. Now, like I said in the introduction, that is a kind of a stupid question, but at the same time, it's also a very viable one. Why? Well, this indeed tastes like orange. First of all, let's take a little memory lane thing here. Rock and roll basically spawned from blues music, which again then was kind of a slavery-bound stuff. This is a really short version. So it was kind of like anti-mainstream, anti-governmental, anti-masters and whatnot. We skip to the later years. Well, rock music comes, it's the devil's music. It just, makes people go crazy, go insane, kind of like messes them up, like in some diabolical ritual. Eventually people get kind of used to it, they start dancing it, and old school people are like, oh, doing crosses and all that stuff, and consider it they're really possessing music. But as we know, Beatles and the stuff, they were kind of a rebellious at the time, and then people got used to it. Elvis was a big thing with his hip movement, also possessing people, turning them into a sexual devoutes and whatnot. Then later on, rock and roll had to evolve, become more dangerous. If you remember from the 80s, you had this explicit lyrics, parental advisory, because rock and roll was causing suicides, murders and whatnot. Obviously there was banned for Cannibal Corpse albums. You could not possibly have Rotting Christ albums at some point. So rock and roll evolved into kind of like more extreme in the terms of metal. There was Sex Pistols and whatever, punk causing problems. So every time people kind of got used to a certain level of rock music and its variants, speed, punk, metal, whatnot, metal had to kind of like step up the game and become more dangerous. Now, even though people kind of got, used to that as well, I mean, think of nowadays punk music, I mean the mainstream punk, it's not really threatening, it's not really dangerous, not to mention your average rock and roll band, like bands from the 80s having hairdos and whatnot. I mean, yeah, surely they used drugs and there was lots of sex, but I mean, it wasn't that big thing anymore in the 80s, not to mention nowadays. But can we really swallow the idea that rock and roll is dead? I mean, it's not musically dead, obviously. There are lots of things going on all the time. I mean, like big bands, Foo Fighters and whatnot, going on stage. And now you're asking, what the hell does this have to do with metal music? Well, you cannot really separate rock from metal or vice versa, can you? Now, you kind of have to understand the basics here before we can actually ask a real question. Now, whether Rammstein is metal or rock music doesn't really matter. It has both elements, and so as such in position, Richard Kruspe is basically in a place where he can totally ask this question. And he was claiming that it's more like hip-hop is doing the rebellious things. And what I know from, for example, French kids, you know, and other people, well, certainly. If we're not talking about 50 Cent and all that stuff, if we're talking about drug-driven, you know, hip-hop music or rap music, gangster rap even, well, certainly it seems to be more dangerous. I mean, they're drugs, they're fast cars, they're hookers, they're gangs. If you were reading about this 6ix9ine case, you know, the one with really funny teeth and weird, colorful hairstyle, he has videos with, you know, gangs hanging out with Crips and Bloods from the Los Angeles area, also drug thingies, and now he's basically facing like some 20 years or whatever lifetime in prison because of racketeering and all that stuff. Now, there are plenty of videos and plenty of news of that, and I'm not gonna like try to put this any kind of into hip hop or rap video, but I'm just simply stating there are more kind of a dangerous or more rebellious stuff happening outside metal, even though music-wise it might be, say, more light, more soft, more whatever. So is metal losing the grasp then? Yes and no. If you're taking a look at the, you know, mainstream bands, big or small, we can pretty much say that Richard is right there. I mean, look at Metallica, Iron Maiden, or the bands like Five Finger, Death Punch, Foo Fighters. I mean, it is already kind of like family music. For example, as much as I hate the band, you know, Five Finger Death Punch, it made me kind of very funny that they have this kind of like, yeah, let's be real badass tattooed guys and do this heavy screamy stuff, but at the same time also this kind of a lightweight stuff and whatever. And then they had this kind of like PR stunt, you know, handing some tents or whatnot to homeless people. Yeah, nice human thing to do, I guess, but it, like, come on, that is kind of like proving the point here. If metal or rock music wants to be kind of rebellious or dangerous or whatever, well, that's quite the opposite. Of course, many people just want to have them, you know, record sales done, touring life done, live rich family style and whatnot. Who can I blame? But it's really rebellious. I mean, doing some drugs, you know, sniffing some coke out of some prostitutes' bottoms doesn't really make you rebellious. It just makes you decadent. But as it is, there are lots going on, you know, underneath what we have called kind of like mainstream core. Now, if you only dig like a little bit core, you won't find underground, obviously. You will just find bands that are not big enough. They're kind of like the ones that between the mainstream, which are big, and the ones that are really like literally sometimes underground. And I'm referring to places which are like, you know, underground, like cellars and stuff. Anyway, the point is kind of like the ones that are between the underground, you know, kind of like in-betweeners, they are not necessarily any more dangerous or rebellious as their mainstream counterparts. They are just the ones that probably haven't just, you know, succeeded to become big, commercial or whatnot, probably never will. Maybe don't even want to go that big, but they are nevertheless the ones that I'm talking about, the ones that I'm referring about to be dangerous. Well, like I said, it's hard to be that dangerous in 2018 and whatnot, considering that we don't have those hip movements seen as dangerous. We don't see kind of a badass lyrics a la Cannibal Corpse and whatnot to be dangerous. So what could be dangerous nowadays? Well, obviously, if we take a look at social media, basically everything you say can be dangerous. You say pro that or anti that, and you, boom, suddenly labeled as a, I don't know, a toxic masculine guy, or you're a right-wing activist, aka Nazi, or whatever. I mean, there are these kind of labels which are way too easy to get just because you might have some opinion. So when we use these sets of rules and terms and whatnot and use and apply them to music, rock music or metal music, doesn't really matter. They come from the same tree. Then you have this kind of a dangerous or at least rebellious element. One could claim that like before 2000 or late 90s, for example, National Socialist Black Metal, NSBM that is, that wasn't even a thing. There were bands which probably had these kind of a right-wing thoughts and might be have some sympathizers for these kind of extreme ideologies. But I mean, it wasn't a thing back in the days. So it was just like if some band had lyrics or whatnot related to that kind of stuff, it was just band with some maybe weird opinions, whatever. Nowadays, I think many bands have adapted those thoughts, not only because they might be actually extreme, like politically, but also because they still have this kind of a shock value. Now I know people are gonna start bitching at me and like, you know nothing, Jon Snow, because obviously some people think that this kind of a unified NSBM cult is there, but it's, from my personal view, my experience, my personal experience among like around black metal and whatnot, well, I know people who are politically far right, but then again, they are not extreme in the sense of like being terrorists. They are not even extreme when it comes to being politically active. I mean, sure, they might do a voting and, you know, vote somebody who is, you know, in the right political party, but as such, like general people, you know, not really dangerous or maybe even rebellious. Especially if you compare to these kind of like, for example, these hip-hop dudes, which might be actually doing crimes like constantly and still making money with their gigs because they're after all popular musicians as well. So in those terms, these Rammstein guitarist comments actually do kind of like make sense. Rock and roll has kind of matured and become safe, like a middle-aged family person, you know. Instead of being this young guy who is, you know, drinking every weekend and banging the groupies and whatnot, and, you know, acting random violently or whatever. This guy is now family man. And or if we take a girl example, the one who was doing more kind of a wild and slutty style and going wild in the streets and whatnot, and suddenly she's a mother of 2 kids, just living in a nice suburb area with a dog and a cat, and 2 cars, some mortgage, and, you know, there you go. Now, this is basically what happened to rock and roll in so many ways. But we also have to remember that just because some rebellious thoughts died doesn't mean the genre itself died. It just changed, it matured, it became something more acceptable. Like in Finnish we have this kind of saying called salonkikelpoinen, which means like, let's put it this way. There used to be bands which were totally like off borders when it came to like receiving Grammy Awards or being featured in like national TV or, you know, like music television nominations and whatnot. Nowadays, well, boom, it's not like that. You can see even like these really badass bands having those kind of you know, rewards, nominations, getting on, you know, big mainstream TVs, articles written on mainstream newspapers and all that stuff. So it has changed. Even bands like Vatain has gotten nominated in Sweden for, you know, kind of a Grammy Award or similar. I don't actually remember what's called, but point aside, the thing is, these are more or less kind of acceptable rather than what they used to be. I mean, still there's a long way to see any kind of extreme, say politically extreme band to be reviewed in the same way or received in the same way. But then again, like I said, it might seem far-fetched now that some hip movement guys would drive people crazy and others would seem them possessed by this sexual energy and all that stuff. But if you think about it, it was like 40 years ago. So it's not like things can actually change quite swiftly. And then again, I still go back to this political thing. If you go to, say, Asia, you go to Japan and whatever, things that we feel are too extreme, like topics like Holocaust, World War II, Hitler, whatever. I mean, we have those as monsters, and they are terrible, terrible things. Still, people, gonna be afraid of them. You can do certain kind of extreme political salutes because of the things that happen. And by no means, I don't mean it shouldn't be that way. I'm just stating that that's what's going on. But if you go to Japan or, I don't know, India or whatever, things are different. They don't see our monsters as their monsters. So basically, here what a kind of NSBM band would be a kind of a most horrible metal band on earth, or rock band. You take it to Japan and they're like, shrug, what's going on? Arigato, I don't know what you're talking about. So it's different. Then again, something that we might see as normal might be crazy in Japan. I don't know if there are any, but point is, many of these things are actually very culturally dependent in a way. So whatever your next guy, your neighbor might feel it's really raw, brutal, and awkward and all that stuff, you just might feel like, hey, it's normal. Or the other way around. So in these ways, if you don't, Schrodinger's cat theory. I'm not going to explain it to you, but you can just pretty much Google it. But one thing can have like two positions at the same time. So like rock and roll is dead. Rock and roll is still very much alive. And these two can kinda, in this theory, kinda like exist at the same time because we do not really know. But there's a certain truth to this. But also we have to understand and remember that it's not so simple. It's very subjective. It's not an objective thing to say that like, hey, this is how it goes. Of course it gets to the headlines because it's kind of sexy, but then again it's also like lots of new talk about old subject that never kind of got completed. We never found the solution, no resolution about the stuff that we had this great, really stupid question. So what can I say? Rock and roll is dead because you're watching this kind of stuff, and now next time you're gonna play some really bad ass music, ask yourself, is it really rebellious for some sake of it, or is there something deeper, or is it just some noise in space? This is my random rant opinion, whatever you're gonna call it. Have a good one, have a beer, and check yourself before you wreck yourself. Take care.